Welcome everybody, Howling with the Wolfe. We're nearing Christmas, rocking behind the Christmas tree today. Um, Definitely wanted to talk to you guys. Happy holidays to everyone, and I want to talk some Dolphins football. The Dolphins are suddenly winning, and I think Dolphins fans are trying to figure out exactly what that means. So I definitely want to talk about that. I want to talk about Brian Flores because I think that over the last 5 games and really over the last 2 months, we've learned a lot more about him and maybe what his culture will look like in Miami. And I think it's good. And I think that you can tell a lot about Brian Flores and his coaching staff through this first few months of the season. So I definitely want to discuss that. I want to tell you guys some tales from the locker room, things that I've sort of uh, come about the college football playoff, which guys have been arguing about all week. I want to kind of take you guys inside the locker room about that. And I found out how Ryan Fitzpatrick started to chew gum, and he does it during games and practice. So I want to kind of share that with you. So as always, thanks for joining. Fire away questions in the chat whenever you guys want, and I'll pause and answer you guys questions about the Dolphins, about the NFL, really about anything as we head into this next few minutes. So first things first, I wanted to talk about the thing that's kind of been hanging over folks for the last few weeks. We talked about this on our Howling with the Wolf chat 2 weeks ago before Thanksgiving. But Tua Tagovailoa is the potential Dolphins quarterback everybody's been waiting for. He had a press conference today. He talked to media last week, and he kind of said a lot of uncertainty about his future and whether he's going to declare to the NFL draft. So I very briefly wanted to talk about this and what it means for the Dolphins. So if Tua doesn't declare for this draft, it's all bad because it takes out first one of the top options at quarterback for this team and possibly the option for the Dolphins. And that's something that, when you came into this season, whether you were a fan of the tank, whether you weren't a fan of the tank, you knew that the Dolphins needed a quarterback. And whether it was going to be Tua, whether it was going to be Joe Burrow, or whether it's going to be, close your eyes, Justin Herbert, you needed a quarterback. So we're looking at a situation of Tua decides to go back to Alabama for his redshirt junior year. You're looking at a scenario where Joe Burrow becomes the clear QB1, probably going to Cincinnati, and then you essentially have a choice between Justin Herbert, who may or may not be available when the Dolphins pick, or settling for another quarterback or waiting for next year. So I think that's the worst case scenario, I think, for the Dolphins because in my opinion, and I know people have different opinions, but in my opinion, you've got to come out of this draft with a quarterback that you believe in. And you can't really sell your fan base on another year of waiting for a quarterback. I think that would just be a really tough sell. I know I wouldn't be a fan of it, and it would be really hard to build around a team without a quarterback. And then, they're obviously going to be better next year with more draft picks, with more talent. And how are they going to go get that quarterback next year? So I think there's just more question marks if they don't end up getting a quarterback this year. And I think you come into a situation where you're essentially played yourself out of the quarterback that you could have potentially had. So I think everything, if everything goes the Dolphins' way, Tua declares whether they end up with him or not. It adds another QB option for them, and it provides them with more flexibility when it comes draft time. Caleb Gray has a question. He says, "What's up? What about trading up with all the draft capital they have?" And this is something that Hurricanes Hane 7 is asking a similar question. Can they trade up and go get Chase Young or trade to it? So this is something I've talked about a little bit in like previous articles about Chris Greer in September when they traded Minkah Fitzpatrick. He sat there in front of a lot of us in a press conference and in his own way essentially said we can do whatever we want. We have the capital to do whatever the heck we want. We've got 3 first-round picks. We got over $100 million in salary cap space. They got 14 projected picks. So, yeah, they can move up to an extent. The question then becomes, one, is it worth it? This is a team that has a lot of holes. Offensive line, edge rushers, quarterback, offensive line, edge rusher, offensive line. You guys get the point. There's a lot of holes on this team So if you use some of those draft capital, we use another first round pick, use a first round pick and a second round pick. That's going to take away from your needs. That being said, there's no other position more important than the quarterback. So I don't know if I'd trade a whole bounty up for Chase Young, even though I think he's going to be a game-changing player. Edge rushers, there's only so much impact I think they can have on a game versus a quarterback who changes everything. So if you're going to get that quarterback, whether it's a Joe Burrow or whether it's Tua, yes, I'm in support of trading up, even if it costs you your capital. But that being said, that'll probably take you a step back in your rebuild because maybe you use that first round pick that could have went to an edge rusher, an offensive tackle, and now you've got to wait another year to get that guy. So all these things, there's risks and rewards for all of them. But I think the most important thing for the Dolphins is to get their quarterback this draft. And, I think I'd love for it to be Tua. They just got to feel comfortable about his medicals. And that's going to be the question between now and January 20th when Tua has to make a decision whether he declares or not. And then even after that, if he does declare, that's going to be something they discuss continually up to the draft process. Do you feel comfortable about the hip? When does he play? When do you feel comfortable taking him? How long will his career be? These are all questions I don't know the answer to. Dolphins don't know the answer to. Heck, Tua might not even know the answer to. And that's something that's going to make this draft period intriguing. So I think Tua may end up being the most polarizing and interesting player in this upcoming draft for a different reason than maybe we initially thought. So I'm going to go ahead and move on a little bit and talk about the current Dolphins. If you want to jump back into Tua, ask a question, and we'll jump back into that later in the chat. But Brian Flores, I'm writing a story on ESPN.com about Brian Flores tomorrow. Plug, go check it out, get them page views up. So I know you guys care. So yes, essentially I think, and I know some of my colleagues have had disagreements about this, but I think that Brian Flores is showing coaching promise in his first year. They're 3-9. You can't crown them. Don't crown them. But I think that given where they were at the start of the season, I remember there was a period in September after they lost 102-10 in their first two games combined. After they traded away Laramie Tunsil, Kenny Stills, and Minka Fitzpatrick. After the situations that Brian Flores had with Kenny Stills and the Jay-Z, that Kenny Stills had with Stephen Ross and Donald Trump, all those matters happened in a matter of a month. And I think there was a lot of legitimate doubt, from players, from people in the organization about what's this going to mean? All the tanking cries were coming out of nowhere. It was a real unstable period. I was walking in the locker room and it felt like you were walking on eggshells. And I don't know what Flores did, but he was able to flip the script to the point where at this point, we're not talking about, some of the issues they had in the season. We're talking about how Brian Flores has made chicken out of chicken salad out of chicken shit, So I think you're in a situation where you may have found the right coach. And what is that worth? And I think for the Dolphins, they've decided that that's worth risking the number one overall pick. You can agree or disagree, but I think that you essentially had to choose. And I joke with some of my colleagues in the media room, the ultimate tanking move might have been hiring, not Brian Flores, might have been hiring Zach Taylor, the Cincinnati Bengals coach, and maybe that would have helped you. Maybe that would have helped you tank a little better. So I think that Brian Flores hire was essentially them saying, hey, we're going to choose a winning culture over the number one overall pick for better or for worse. So I think that, I think there's a lot of positivity and hope that maybe they found the right coach. And I think that's worth a good bit. So I think that, when you look at this team, they have 72 players on this team. They've played a snap for this team. 72 different players have played a snap on this team. The NFL record is 78. So they are 6 players away from breaking the NFL record for most players that have played for this team. They have 22 undrafted free agents, guys who have been undrafted free agents who are on this roster after 53. That's over 40% of the roster. So if you're just looking at pure talent and pure flexibility and continually turning this roster, this is a situation where they have literally made this team to the point where they beat a team that might win the NFC East. So I think that deserves a lot of credit. Yes, they're 3-9. Yes, they're not a good team. They're not close to being a contender. But if he can do this with this amount of talent, what can he do when they actually get that all-pro edge rusher? They actually get that quarterback. So I'm excited about that. I had my words earlier in the year, but I think from what I've seen now, I'm excited about the Brian Flores tenure and what's ahead for him in Miami. So that's my thoughts on that. I got a question here. Sorry, Jason, for the tell your kids that don't listen to Cam. That's not a good word to say. Um, Luis Velasquez said, "Do you reach for a quarterback like Herbert or Fromm, or do you think the best player for your team, or do you get the best player for your team? I think if Burrow or Tua is not available, I would not select a quarterback." Yeah, I talked about this a little earlier, and I'll briefly hit on this, and then I want to share a little bit thoughts about where I think the Dolphins rest of the season and what we can learn about them, and I want to share some tales inside the locker room. But I think the worst thing the Dolphins can do is reach for a quarterback. That being said, I think they're going to be in a lot of pressure to walk away in this draft for a quarterback. So I think that they're going to have to evaluate who they are willing to bet their franchise on, whether that's just Joe Burrow, whether that's just Joe Burrow and Tua, whether that's just Joe Burrow, Tua, and Herbert, whoever those three quarterbacks, and say we have to walk out of the draft with that one of those two, or one of those three, and we're gonna have to do everything we can to do it. So that's a Dolphins. It's a Chris Greer decision. I don't know how many quarterbacks they feel they can bet their franchise on. And for Chris Greer, he's got to be willing to say, "Hey, I'm willing to bet my job on this," because we know that GMs are often tied to their quarterbacks and tied to their coaches. So if Brian Flores and Chris Greer are betting on Justin Herbert and he ends up being a bust, there's a reasonable chance that Chris Greer might not be here to draft the next quarterback. And I think that he knows that. It's being a realist with your job. So I think that he's got to know that he's got to hit this out of the park, which is why the medicals for Tua are so important. Because although he's super talented, if he never becomes the same player again, or worse, if he never plays the game again, especially like as a starting caliber quarterback, then you've essentially thrown that pick away. And you can't do that with a quarterback first round pick. So I think the interesting element is Tua has been talking a lot recently about whether he comes out depends on how comfortable he is about where he's going in the draft. He said, like, if he was a top 10 or top 15 pick, he said this today, it would be really hard for him to not go to the draft. So, like, I have a comment here from Miami Alondro. Is he fishing for a draft promise, and will he get it? I think that there's probably some gamemanship there in Tua and him saying that, hey, if a team maybe not guarantees me, but wink, wink, if you enter the draft, let's just say you won't get past pick 17, says the team with the 17th overall pick, maybe that helps him make that decision. Maybe that, you can never give a full guarantee, but if his team feels pretty confident that he's going in the first half of the draft, then I think he declares. That being said, how much can teams know without getting him to the combine, without having him test that hip? So a lot of it's projection. A lot of them is they got to feel really good about it, and they got to say the risk is worth taking the risk. The reward for it is worth it. So maybe a team like the Dolphins, maybe a team that already has a starting quarterback like the Los Angeles Chargers. Those are the type of teams I think that can take that sort of risk. And yeah, I think it's probably going to take a team saying that we're willing to take him in the first round, even before they see him work out. That might be what it takes to get him to the draft. So yeah, I do think that he's not necessarily fishing for a draft promise, but he wants to get some love. Tua wants some love. He wants people to say, "Hey, we got you, dog. We're not gonna let you. We're not gonna let you get to the second round." And I think that's something that a team is gonna have to feel comfortable saying. So I don't know. I think that we have a month and a half before Tua has to make the decision. And the way he's talking now, it seems like he's not gonna make the decision until January. So until then, we're going to have to wait and see. But best believe whenever he makes his decision, we're going to come back here on Howling with the Wolf and chat about what it all means. So Eric Cotton has a question. He says, would you take two quarterbacks this draft, a la Washington with RG3 and Cousins, assuming one quarterback is Tua? I think that's a really good question because especially if you took a quarterback like Tua in the first round, maybe you hedge your bets a little bit and get you some people's favorite quarterback and a former teammate of his, Jalen Hurts, maybe in the third round. They have a lot of picks. That would be something that I think would be interesting, particularly because I don't think that they have any love lost for Josh Rosen at this point, and I don't necessarily see him being a part of their future. So whether it's a trade or whether he just sticks around as a backup, I'm not sure. But I do think that there's going to be room for this team to have multiple quarterbacks, multiple young quarterbacks going forward. Appreciate you, Jason, for coming in, man. I see he has a question here. I'm gonna answer your Steve Ross question in a second, but appreciate you tuning in. But I think that that would be a situation that I would be extremely comfortable with, especially if you're looking at Tua potentially not playing as a rookie. You get a chance to get that rookie out there, compete with Fitz if he comes back, and have a guy that can play. And worst case scenario, Tua doesn't end up being the player you thought. Maybe Jalen Hurts or whoever you pick in the third round or fourth round becomes that guy. And best case scenario, Tua does come back, and now you've got a starter backup combo that you feel really good about for years and years to come. So I think that would be the route I go for. If you pick Tua, I would definitely want to hedge my bet and get a mid-round quarterback to kind of groom with them, like you said, a la RG3. So very good question, Eric, and I think that's what I would shoot for if they did take Tua. Let's see. Miami Landro is saying, if Tua enters the draft, can we assume some team made him a promise and do GMs know what team it is? There's always rumors of promises, but like, here's the thing about it. Like, you've got to really trust a team. Like, I've heard players tell me stories of how a team would call them up. They're next on the clock and say, hey, we're about to draft you. And then they draft somebody else. And like, what you gonna do? You gonna be mad and say, "Hey, they told me they were gonna draft me." Like, at the end of the day, teams can do whatever they want. So yeah, a team might tell you, "Hey, you're not gonna get past 16," and then they could say, "Oh, something else happened. Somebody else fell to us, and we took that guy." So a draft promise could be made, or more likely, a draft sort of what they essentially do for Tua is they have a draft advisory board that tells him, they give him 3 different grades. They give him a first round grade. I think they give him either a second round or a second day grade, or they tell him to go back to school. And they poll GMs and different teams. So if they poll teams and teams say, hey, you're going to be a first round pick, they're going to give him a first round grade, and that's going to ideally convince him to come out. That being said, like, maybe through back channels that can get to his people, the Miami can get to his people. Stephen Ross, as Jason alluded to, can get to his people and say, hey, Miami will take you with one of your first 3 picks. And then his team can say, hey, because of that, we're going to go to the draft knowing that there's a good chance we go in the top 20. So that's sort of how those things work. But other teams won't know. Like, you can speculate. Like, if Tua entered the draft, there would be a lot of rumblings and rumors that, hey, maybe Miami gave him a guarantee, maybe the Chargers did, but nobody would truly know outside of Tua and Miami, because those teams will want to keep it secret. Why would they want to show their cards so another team could trade up in front of them? So that's playing the game a little bit, but that is something that to think about if Tua does end up declaring. Thank you guys for the questions. I know we're being Tua heavy, but I know he's something that you guys care about. So that's what I'm here for. If I want to talk about something, y'all want to talk about something else, that's what we're talking about. So I'll take a couple more questions, and then I want to share my locker room stories, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it for the night. Let's see. Brett615 says, what's up, Cam? Tighten up. We miss you here in Nashville. Miss you guys, too. I see Ryan Tannehill is leading them boys down real good. Derrick Henry's running all over them boys. I like to see the Titans doing well. I hope they get to the playoffs, man. A lot of good people up there that I still have good relationships with. So thank you guys for still tuning in, and hope that the rest of the season goes well for you. Let's see. Got a question here from Drew Welch. Sorry about that. It says, do Tua retire if Miami drafts him and doesn't draft any offensive linemen? That's hilarious. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think we talked about this at the beginning of the chat, but none of this matters if they don't get an offensive line and fill some of these other needs. Quarterback is the big flashy position. You've got to get that. But this team is not going to be a contender until they get at least 3 new offensive linemen. And that's something that's going to have to be a priority in free agency and the draft. And that's something that this team desperately needs. So Tua, Herbert, Burrow, whoever the quarterback is, They need offensive line. Locker room stories. Two things to share for you guys this week. I missed you guys last week because of the because of Thanksgiving. So I'm going to share with you guys two inside the locker room moments. First things first. I've shared with you guys before that there's a lot of college football talk in the locker room. This week, obviously, is college football championship week, and everybody's looking at the playoff. So I had a nice 10, 15-minute conversation with a group of the defensive backs, and then Devon Gottschall came in there about the playoff and what they think is going to happen. So I'll give you guys dynamics here. We got Eric Rowe, recently re-signed Dolphins defensive back Eric Rowe, safety. He went to the University of Utah. He's also a Houston guy. I went to the University of Houston, so we chatted about that. But he's a Utah guy. So he wants Utah to get into the playoff. And across the board, Stephen Parker, another safety, went to Oklahoma. He wants Oklahoma to get in the playoff. And we're discussing just the competition between those two teams. And they had very convincing arguments, both sides. And I want to present them to you guys and see what you guys think. Because I have my thoughts, but I want to present it to you. So Eric Rowe's thought is that, Utah has been ahead of Oklahoma in the playoff throughout the entire year. They're going to win the Pac-12. They beat Oregon, another good win. And they've got really exciting players on that side of the ball. And there's always a lot of East Coast bias. It'd be good to get a West Coast team in there to play in that playoff. And there's no reason that Oklahoma should jump Utah if Oklahoma's at 5 ahead of Utah right now, especially if Utah wins. Utah shouldn't deserve to drop. That's Eric Rowe's argument. Stephen Parker, on the other end, Oklahoma fans. They're number 6 in the rankings behind Utah at number 5. Stephen Parker says Utah ain't played nobody. He said that Oklahoma playing Baylor this week is number 7. That's a better win. So he thinks that if Oklahoma beats Baylor, 6 beating 7, that's a better win than Utah, number 5, beating number 13 Oregon. So he said that Oklahoma deserves to jump Utah and get into the playoffs. This, of course, is all assuming that LSU beats Georgia. Because as Devon Gottschall came in and argued, even if LSU loses, they still deserve to be in the playoff because they have 5 top 25 wins. So I ask you, first, Oklahoma or Utah, who do you think, which argument do you like better? And 2, do you think LSU deserves to get in if they lose to Georgia? What do you think? So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Put your answers in the chat, and then I'll share with you guys my second inside the locker room moment, and we'll come back to that, and I'll share my thoughts. Second, I am very interested in the elements of Ryan Fitzpatrick. I shared with you guys previously about his beard and the beard journey he's went through his career. The most recent thing I asked him about, and he gladly abides me for my random questions I asked near his locker. I asked, what's up with the bubble gum? If you guys haven't noticed, and I'm sure you have watching the broadcast, Ryan Fitzpatrick always chews a big wad of bubble gum. And you see it like behind that beard, and he doesn't wear a mouthpiece. He just chews bubble gum all game long. And even in practices, he practiced with bubble gum. And he essentially, I have seen periods of him in practice where after practice, especially during training camp, he comes up and does an interview with us off to the side. He puts the bubble gum on his helmet, does the interview, and then puts the bubble gum back in his mouth and keeps chewing, which some people may think is unsanitary, but he just thinks that's normal. So I got behind the story. Apparently, he's never worn a mouthpiece in his career. He said he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the feel of it. He doesn't feel like it's comfortable. He's not a mouthpiece guy. So he's never worn a mouthpiece. So he's done different things. He wants to keep his mouth active throughout the game. So he decided one game in 2014, and again in Houston, when he was a Houston Texans quarterback, to chew some bubble gum. So he threw 6 touchdowns in the game, still a career high for him, and no interceptions, and led him to a win. So he said his son reminded him that that's the game where he had his best game yet, and maybe you call it a superstition, maybe you call it a routine, but every week since, he has to chew bubble gum during the game, and he has to chew it during practice. That's been the thing for him. So that's the bubblegum Ryan Fitzpatrick story. The journey, I thought that was interesting to me because I don't know if there's another player that doesn't wear a mouthpiece and chews bubble gum all the time. But I thought that was a little story. If you see that big wad of bubble gum in his mouth, that is why. So those are my two inside the locker room moments. I see I have a couple comments here about the college football playoff, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts. So Luis Velasquez says nobody, not even these players' mamas wants to see Utah in the playoffs. He didn't say that nobody's mamas part. He says I believe the selection committee made Baylor and Oklahoma 6-7 just to make sure we don't see Utah in the playoff. Interesting. He said it's going to be the Big 12 champion no matter what. And then we've got one from Cam Dia 4 that says Oklahoma because they would have beaten Baylor twice. And yes, LSU stays in if Georgia wins. So we've got 2 votes for Oklahoma no matter what if they win. Eric Rowe will not be happy with you guys. I'm going to New York tomorrow, so I won't see him Friday in the locker room. But when I see him on Sunday after the game, I guess he would have already known if they got in or not. And if they don't get in, I'm going to tell him that my Howling With the Wolfe crowd said it was the right decision. So I'll let you guys know what he says. He won't be happy with y'all. By the way, my thoughts are I think Oklahoma should get into the playoff if they win too. So I agree with y'all. I think the Big 12 champion, I'm of the nobody has played Utah. They literally haven't beat a top 25 team all season. I don't think it's the nobody wants to see Utah because I think it should be a merit thing, not about a popularity contest. But I do think that Utah ain't played nobody. They ain't beat nobody. So Oklahoma has. They've at least played and beat Baylor twice, maybe if they win on Sunday. And I think that's worthy enough to get them into the playoffs, even though that defense is suspect. So, yeah, that's it for me this week, man. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. If you're a Dolphins fan, good luck to you guys this weekend against Adam Gase and the Jets. And we'll be back here again next week. Thank you, guys.